Thank you. And we will benefit from interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So you should be able to choose your preferred language by clicking on the little globe with interpretation next to it at the bottom of your Zoom conference screen. So that's for the interpretation. So I will now switch to French. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous à cette discussion virtuelle sur la complémentarité et la Cour pénale internationale, événement que la Fédération internationale pour les droits humains, donc la FIDH, organise dans le contexte de la 20e session de l'Assemblée des États parties au statut de la CPI, qui s'est achevée samedi dernier. Mon nom est Delphine Carlens et je dirige le Bureau Justice internationale de la FIDH, dont le mandat est de mettre en œuvre une des priorités de la FIDH, qui est de contribuer à la lutte contre l'impunité des auteurs des crimes les plus graves, et aussi de soutenir les victimes de ces crimes à effectivement accéder à la vérité, à la justice et aux réparations. Dans ce cadre, la FIDH est en étroite collaboration avec ses organisations membres et étudie systématiquement en premier lieu les possibilités pour les victimes d'accéder à la justice dans le pays où les crimes ont été commis. Cet exercice se fait souvent en challengeant la volonté et la capacité des autorités à enquêter, poursuivre et condamner les auteurs et réparer le préjudice causé. Et nous avons entrepris ce travail, par exemple, en Guinée, en République centrafricaine, en Côte d'Ivoire ou au Mali, qui sont toutes des situations sous examen préliminaire ou enquête devant la CPI. Et donc nous sommes donc concrètement engagés à voir comment ce principe de complémentarité, dont on va parler aujourd'hui, et qui est à la base de la compétence de la Cour pénale internationale, comment ce principe de complémentarité est mis en œuvre dans les faits. Grâce à la présence de la FIDH et sa représentation permanente à La Haye depuis 2004 et une collaboration continue avec la Cour depuis, l'analyse du bureau du procureur de la CPI sur la complémentarité dans de nombreuses situations où ont été commis des crimes internationaux, dont celle qui illustre les discussions d'aujourd'hui. Et dans ce cadre-ci, nous avons essayé de promouvoir une approche par la CPI de la complémentarité positive qui inclut une interaction et un soutien réciproque, disons, en matière d'enquête et de poursuite des auteurs de crimes internationaux. Sachant que la CPI se limite de toute façon à la poursuite de quelques-uns des plus hauts responsables. Cette année, plusieurs développements intéressants devant la CPI ont remis un peu à l'ordre du jour cette question de la complémentarité entre les juridictions nationales et la CPI. Et il semble émerger une vision renouvelée de la complémentarité positive avec l'arrivée du procureur Karim Khan en juin dernier, comme ont pu l'illustrer les accords récents conclus entre le procureur et les autorités en Colombie et au Venezuela. Deux accords de coopération qui sont la base de deux décisions assez différentes, l'une étant la fermeture de l'examen préliminaire de la Colombie et l'autre l'ouverture d'une enquête sur le Venezuela. Donc, ceci nous a un peu amené à l'organisation de cette discussion entre praticiens et experts qui visent à contribuer au débat autour de la complémentarité. Donc, pour modérer cette discussion, nous avons le plaisir de pouvoir compter sur Angela Modokuti, qui est une avocate zimbabwéenne spécialisée dans le droit pénal international et qui a travaillé dans de nombreuses organisations menant des activités de documentation, de contentieux, de plaidoyer pour la lutte contre l'impunité des crimes internationaux et qui a travaillé extensivement sur la question de la complémentarité, tant du point de vue pratique que d'un côté plus universitaire. Donc, je laisse donc la parole à Angela pour modérer ce débat. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Delphine, and thank you for organizing this event and for having me. I think it's a very important event and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. As we all know, complementarity is an important founding principle of the Rome Statute, and its application in practice continues to affect the work of the OTP and to affect survivors and the communities they come from, which is why today's discussion is particularly important. This panel would discuss the challenges the OTP faces when carrying out its complementarity assessments, including considering whether states are genuinely investigating and prosecuting alleged Rome Statute crimes. And we're going to look specifically at the context in Guinea, Colombia, Sudan, and Venezuela. Helping us unpack all these issues, I'm very pleased to be joined by Rod Rastan, who is legal advisor at the OTP and the acting head of the preliminary examination section, Jimena Reyes, who is the Americas director of FIDH, Asmao Diallo, who is the president of AVIPA, Alpha Amadou Diasba, who's the vice president of OGDH, and Amir Suleiman, legal advisor for the African Center for Justice and Peace Studies. And I encourage our audience members, please, to take a moment to read all their very impressive bios that have been posted in the chat. So in terms of the format today and a few of our housekeeping rules, I'll be asking our speakers a few questions, and then we will take questions from the floor. We will open the chat and allow audience members to type in questions to the hosts, and then those questions will be transmitted to me and I will put them to our panelists. Audience members, I encourage you to keep your cameras on. It's quite nice if we can see you, but we request that you keep yourselves on mute so that we can keep the discussion going. To my panelists, I request that you speak as slowly as possible because we do have simultaneous translation and I have to remind myself of the very same thing. So let's all do our very best. So now that we have some of the housekeeping rules out of the way, Rod, I'm going to start with you. My first question is twofold. Can you take us through the OTP's legal and policy approaches to the gravity threshold, which is something that has been discussed a lot, particularly in the context of the IER? And then secondly, tell us more about the OTP's perspective on complementarity and how it's worked thus far. Over to you, Rod.
Very well. Thank you very much for inviting me on this panel. And I think really, I'll try to also keep my comments quite brief because I think the other colleagues, the experts on the panel have really the most important perspective, which is from the national level in terms of how accountability is faring in the states concerned, and also their thoughts about and reflections on the ICC's role. So I think in terms of maybe I can address complementarity first and then come to gravity. In terms of complementarity, I mean, the general approach, as you know, it's to give the primary responsibility to the states. It's of course there in the preamble, but it's not just a conceptual idea. It's also a practical reality. Of course, as we all know, that a court with limited resources but trying to have potentially universal coverage, at least in relation to state parties and then situations referred from the Security Council and so on. Obviously, as a practical matter, also the court cannot manage to sustain a workload if it is the primary port of call for many of these cases. And even where it does open investigations, as we all know, the court is unable to obviously bring accountability for all the different allegations. It must necessarily choose some cases which are emblematic, which are representational of broader patterns of victimization. So complementarity is also a burning reality, a practical reality in relation to making sure that accountability can prevail and can flourish primarily at the national level. And then, of course, you've seen in terms of the policies and strategies coming out from the Office of the Prosecutor over the years, from different prosecutors, and also from the ASP, the institution as a whole, the organs of the court. This includes also the registrar, to the extent that the registry is also working in these areas to facilitate and promote national capacities, as well as the governing body of the ASP. The approach is very much towards how can we energize and make effective the national response. Complementarity, of course, it's a complement of two things. And the two components of it, of course, are the international level and the national level. They're hardly equal. Of course, the international level is a very small component compared to the national capacity, national level. And primarily the bulk, the main gravitas towards accountability was always intended to be at the national level. This is the aspiration of the statute. This is the goal foreseen. But I think we would all recognize that this relationship has yet to really take off in the way that is envisaged in the statute. It's an aspiration in the statute, but it's yet to take off in that way of seeing a shared burden, a complementary relationship between the ICC and the national levels in the way that there would be a complementary approach towards accountability. Or the courts being able to step back as a result of increased activism at the national level. We've seen some examples of that, but still quite rare. And one of the reasons for that, I'm sure the panelists will have some really much better insights than me on this, is it's perhaps it's by design. It's perhaps a difficult aspiration to achieve, because the involvement of the ICC in the first place is because there has been some failing or limitation at the national level, because the states have been inactive at the national level, or there is unwillingness and inability. So by definition, the ICC is going to step in and become active where there's been an absence at the national level. So then that then puts all of the focus on the ICC in a way that sometimes is unsustainable in terms of expecting the ICC to be providing accountability in relation to all those expectations. And so then the focus must also then turn to what can be done at the national level to complement that effort. And that's of course a far more difficult proposition, perhaps in practice than it sounds in theory. So I think, yes, I'm very keen to learn also from the colleagues from the panel in terms of how that experience has gone out. Just to say, in terms of the, just 2 words, in terms of positive complementarity, this is a phrase that, as you know, has been used over many years. And I think it's important to bear in mind that it means different things to different people, for sure, but also it means very different things to the OTP than to the ASP. And this was something that came up recently in a discussion with the Hague Working Group. For the ASP, according to the important stock-taking initiative that was done in 2010 in Kampala, positive complementarity is about how states can support each other to build capacity in those states, particularly that they're unable. Unwillingness has to be addressed, but in particular in relation to inability. Can states work together to assist each other to bring rule of law technical assistance or capacity building, donor assistance, to help to bridge the gap by building capacity or providing assistance? That's positive complementarity in the Kampala stock-taking exercise perspective. And it requires substantial rule of law assistance. For the Office of the Prosecutor, it cannot mean the same thing, because the Office of the Prosecutor is not a technical assistance or capacity building office. It cannot provide that kind of structural assistance. It cannot provide donor assistance. It barely, as you know, has the budget to sustain its own activities, never mind providing assistance to states to build their capacities. But what the office can do is to provide lessons learned, to exchange practices, potentially to share evidence, subject to the, of course, the precautions in terms of witness security and source protection and so on. And it can also see how it can contribute towards national accountability in other ways. So those are also important, but are very different to what the ASP can do. And I think that's important. That distinction is important, because sometimes there is a criticism that the Office of the Prosecutor is using its resources to build capacity at the national level, as if we are doing rule of law technical assistance, but that's not our function. And we simply don't have either the expertise or the capacity to do
pas non plus les compétences et les nécessaires pour le faire.
So anyway, maybe I'll just leave it at that for complementarity. And as you know, for the current prosecutor, indeed, it's a big theme. He's mentioned it in his inaugural address, and it's a big theme in the different messages that he's had in the field. It's always been the case with all prosecutors that there is a general hope that there could be an absence of trials in the Hague as a result of a flourishing of cases at the national level. But certainly, the current prosecutor, Karim Khan, he's trying to see how that can be given fresh impetus, if you like. And one of the ways that he's approached it is to see how he can make a more concrete legal framework to get undertakings in this regard. So you've seen efforts to do that in both Colombia and Venezuela in very different contexts. And also he's trying to explore how complementarity could apply throughout the entire life cycle of situations. When situations are under pre-examination, when situations go out of pre-examination, such as Colombia, we can continue to be involved. When situations move into investigation, such as Venezuela, in situations that have long been under investigation, such as Sudan, and we'll discuss Guinea as well. So these are some efforts that are being explored, and again, I'm sure we'll discuss that. Angela, maybe I've spoken already too much and I should stop and save gravity for later, but I'm happy also to address that quickly.
Thanks, Rod. That's perfect. Let me move on to the other speakers and then we'll come back to you, of course, and you can address gravity then as well. Thank you, Rod, for laying that very important foundation and framing our discussion, especially highlighting the tension between how we interpret positive complementarity differently. States' interpretation, the OTP's interpretation, civil society organizations. I think that's a very good place for us to move on to the other speakers to get their sense of the OTP's contribution and work in their specific situations. So I'm going to move on to Alpha, Jimena, and Amir. Maybe you can tell us why complementarity has been important in your contexts and what your experience has been like in this respect with the ICC and the principle of complementarity. I'm going to start with you, Alpha. You have the floor. Alpha, can you hear us?
Bonjour tout le monde. Bon, il y a eu quelques petits problèmes au niveau de la traduction. Je n'ai pas très bien compris ce que Angela a dit après l'intervention de son prédécesseur. Je ne sais pas si elle peut revenir sur la question.
Sorry, we seem to be having a problem with the translation there.
Angela, if you can repeat the question, Alpha would need to hear it again because he couldn't hear it.
Thank you very much. I'll repeat the question for you, Alpha. I was asking about your experience with complementarity in your context and why it is so important, and any reflections you have on the ICC's work thus far in your situation. Is that okay, Alpha?
Visiblement, il y a un problème avec la traduction, Alpha, mais si je peux, la question est ton expérience de la complémentarité et dans la situation dans laquelle tu travailles et évaluation de la relation avec la Cour. Je crois que c'était ça.
Merci beaucoup pour la traduction. OK. Donc, je vous remercie je suis très heureux d'être dans ce panel. La Guinée, comme vous le savez, est un pays qui a une histoire très tragique. Les violations des droits de l'homme ont été perpétuées par les différents régimes qui se sont succédés depuis 1958. Donc, c'est naturellement, ça a été une très bonne chose que dans le cadre du dossier du 28 septembre, que la Cour pénale internationale s'intéresse à ce dossier parce que toutes les autres violations des droits de l'homme que la Guinée a connues n'ont jamais été judiciarisées et jusqu'à date, aucune poursuite n'a été engagée contre ces auteurs. Donc, revenant donc justement au dossier du 28 septembre, en 2010, le gouvernement n'était pas très disposé à judiciariser de façon beaucoup plus professionnelle le dossier. Donc, la CPI, après l'examen préliminaire, l'enquête a été ouverte en Guinée, mais étant donné la lenteur au niveau de la procédure, donc plusieurs missions ont été effectuées à Conakry, justement par le bureau du procureur, pour justement faire des évaluations périodiques au niveau du gouvernement. Donc, cela a beaucoup fait évoluer la procédure parce que à chaque fois que la CPI se rendait à Conakry, quelques jours auparavant, des inculpations étaient posées et on avait coutume à dire à l'époque que chaque visite, ou en tout cas chaque visite annoncée de la CPI, du bureau du procureur à Conakry, coïncidait à une inculpation le lendemain. Donc, cette pression qu'a exercée la CPI sur le gouvernement a eu des résultats très concrets en ce qui concerne la procédure, puisque le gouvernement a utilisé le dilatoire pendant toutes ces années, justement pour empêcher que cette procédure ne connaisse son épilogue. Donc, la procédure a connu une lenteur extraordinaire, puisque de 2009, au moment des faits, jusqu'à date, l'instruction a été clôturée depuis 2017, mais jusqu'à présent, le procès n'a pas été organisé. Mais le fait que la CPI se rendait fréquemment à Conakry a quand même obligé le gouvernement d'abord à poursuivre l'enquête et ensuite à faire des réformes. Parce que le statut de Rome, qui parle des crimes contre l'humanité, des tortures, ont été intégrés dans le code pénal guinéen. Donc, c'est aussi l'implication de la CPI qui a aussi favorisé en quelque sorte des réformes législatives au niveau du pays qui ont permis aujourd'hui qu'au lieu que ce soit, on vise le statut de Rome pour poursuivre des crimes contre l'humanité, aujourd'hui, dans notre ordonnancement juridique, notamment dans le code pénal, il est prévu des crimes contre l'humanité. Donc, en quelque sorte, beaucoup d'infractions qui n'étaient pas prévues dans notre code pénal ont été intégrées justement dans le cadre de cette complémentarité. Donc, au niveau législatif, il y a eu des réformes. Au niveau du dossier du 28 septembre, il y a eu un appui sur plusieurs aspects qui ont permis aujourd'hui à la Guinée de clôturer l'affaire. Mais il fut un moment, quand même, le bureau du procureur s'était presque accommodé de la lenteur et du dilatoire du gouvernement guinéen. Donc, vers 2018, avant le départ de Mme Bensouda, il y avait beaucoup d'inquiétudes au niveau de l'OGDA, de Avipa et je crois aussi au niveau de la FIDH, parce que le discours qui devait être tenu pour justement rappeler le gouvernement guinéen ses responsabilités de conduire ce procès, ce discours n'était plus un discours de poigne, mais un discours presque de complaisance. Donc aujourd'hui, avec le changement au niveau du bureau du procureur et la récente visite de la mission à Conakry, je crois que le discours il a changé. Entre-temps aussi, le régime Alpha Condé, qui a en quelque sorte empêché la tenue de ce procès, est déjà déchu. Donc aujourd'hui, il y a une grande chance que ce dossier puisse être puisse être programmé dans les prochains mois. Donc, cette complémentarité a eu des effets positifs même dans la gestion de ce dossier, comme je l'ai dit tantôt sur le plan législatif et aussi sur le plan judiciaire. Donc aujourd'hui, nous nous acheminons véritablement vers la tenue du procès. Et un délai a été accordé à la Guinée. Donc c'est au mois de mars, à la fin du mois de mars, il faut absolument que le gouvernement programme le dossier. Autrement, le bureau du procureur s'engage à reprendre le dossier. Donc on verra si d'ici cette date, le procès est tenu et quelle va être la réaction du bureau du procureur. Donc, nous espérons que d'ici là, ce procès sera tenu. Et voilà brièvement ce que je voulais apporter en termes de précision. Et je suis à votre disposition pour d'éventuelles questions. Merci.
Thank you, Alpha, and thank you for pointing out something that Rod raised. The question is how can the ICC energize national response? And you've given some very good examples of how the ICC's visits to Conakry have resulted in developments every time, which I think is interesting to see. And also to see how ICC crimes have been integrated into local laws, which is also a positive and interesting development. So thank you for bringing those important factors to our attention. Jimena, I'm going to move on to you, and I'm just going to ask that you restrict yourself to Colombia for now, and then we will move on to Venezuela a little bit later. I know you have expertise in both. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And yes, I think Colombia is a very good example of challenges with respect to consistency, threshold, duration of the complementarity analysis during the preliminary examination. It is important to recall the history of the preliminary examination of Colombia, especially now that it's closed, which lasted 15 years under 3 ICC prosecutors starting in 2004. I would like to talk about 3 key moments that come to question more than answer what the complementary analysis should be during the preliminary examination. So first, May 2008, with the extradition of the 14 most important paramilitary leaders to the US. Second, 2011, with the publication of the interim report. And then 2021, the closing of the preliminary examination. So going back to May 2008, as part of the process of demobilization of paramilitary groups under the Justice and Peace Law, and just when the recently demobilized paramilitary leaders began to explain their links with the political sphere in Colombia, and in particular with President Uribe, they were overnighted, extradited to the United States, and the United States then ruled by Mr. Bush. They were accused of drug trafficking. Most of them benefited from plea bargain, and very few have collaborated to even bring some truth to into the commission of the crimes against humanity in the Colombian proceedings. This extradition was, in our view, FIDH and the CAJAR member in Colombia, a clear obstruction of the current national proceedings at the time, and also a clear demonstration of the unwillingness to bring to justice those most responsible for crimes against humanity of the Colombian state. Yet the ICC prosecutor, Mr. Moreno Campo, did not consider it should trigger the opening of an investigation into the Colombian situation. Obviously, we can imagine the real politics reason behind this decision, but for us, clearly it had an impact on the coherence of the analysis of complementarity. And today, still today, more than 10 years later, some structures of those leaders are still in place and they're still committing crimes. A second moment that came afterwards, as the preliminary examination remained open, and moved the preliminary examination and the analysis of complementarity to a second stage, which is the one that most people recall. It's 2011 and the publication of the interim report on the preliminary examination by the OTP. And this really had the effect of an electroshock in Colombia, both because it said that there were reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity were committed by the guerrilla, by the paramilitaries, and by the military. You have to imagine that we're in the middle of a conflict, and that there was a lot of denial from the state, especially on the commission of serious crimes by militaries. But also because this interim report had part on its analysis of complementarity provided lines of action for Colombian justice. This is the start of what one could call the positive complementarity. And two examples was the creation of the unity of context and analysis within the Colombian prosecutor's office at the beginning of a real case law on crimes against humanity. And this continued during and after the peace agreement of 2016 with a real dialogue between Colombian states, including the high courts and the ICC prosecutor office through letters, amicus dialogue. But beware, if this did contribute to a number of advances, including legislative progresses, a huge impunity gap remains. Plus, these dialogue questions when you should move from dialogue to legal analysis of complementarity that should move to the opening of an investigation. In other words, double standards in terms of preliminary examination, with the existence of two buckets. One, with the countries with which the OTP would work in aiming at positive complementarity, and another one where the preliminary examination is heading toward the possible investigations. But then with the Fatou Bensouda courageous decision on Afghanistan, on Palestine, and also the request opinion on benchmarks for the complementarity analysis of Colombia, one felt we were going towards more coherence on the legal criteria to assess this even complex judicial decisions such as the one in Colombia. And then 2 months ago, closing of the preliminary examination in 2021. Regarding the closing of the preliminary examination, we, FIDH and CAHAR, are still working on our formal position, but some elements on which there is no doubt is that we strongly disagree with this decision. We think it's premature. Yes, it's been 17 years of a preliminary examination, but the peace agreement and the launch of the special jurisdiction for peace are only 3 years old. And the willingness and capacity to investigate and prosecute those most responsible for crimes against humanity committed during the conflict can clearly not be fully assessed. All the more that the special jurisdiction for peace has decided to start to work on the lowest level of responsibility. Also, it was not very respectful towards the victim. At least they felt really betrayed and felt a lack of clarity on the motivation of the closing. Plus, it was 3 months after Fatou Bensouda held the consultation on benchmark to rigorously evaluate the capacity and willingness of the Colombian justice, and we felt the next step was going to have this evaluation. So just to conclude on Colombia, so the preliminary examination is closed, but crimes are still going on. There's 832 human rights defenders that have been killed in the last 5 years since the peace agreement. We don't think the closing of the preliminary examination is going to contribute to the non-recurrence of those crimes. Just while the prosecutor was there, or a couple of days before he arrived, one of the main leaders of the new narco groups was extradited to the US again for drug trafficking. And he probably is responsible of many killings and displacement in Colombia that could constitute crimes against humanity. So that's what I would like to say on Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. Again, we see some catalyst, the ICC being a catalyst for justice in the sense that in 2011, when they released the preliminary examination report, but we also then see, as you highlighted, the shortcomings of the decision to close and the effect that had on the victim. So thank you for bringing the victim view into this discussion, because I think it's very important to hear and understand the whole picture. I'm going to turn to you, Amir, for your reflections on complementarity and the ICC's impact in your situation. Amir, you have the floor.
Thank you, and to be part of this meeting. And unfortunately, I couldn't hear what Alpha said and Dolphin said in French because of the translation. But I think from my very poor French language, I understand what they have said. Okay, about the situation in Sudan. Sudan is one of the first states that signed a Rome Statute, and one of the first states also to withdraw their signatory in 2008. It is the first state, also the president that indicted when he's sitting as the head of the state. According to several reports from nationally, regionally, internationally, which shows that the justice system in Sudan, it is unable and unwilling to trial the perpetrators who committed crimes in Darfur, which is committed there. There is hundreds of thousands of victims who killed. Others are in IDP camps, others they are refugees in neighboring countries, and they are still suffering in Sudan. The other issue that the head of the state now, Al-Burhan, and his vice president, they are part of the these war crimes and genocide and crimes against humanity during al-Bashir's time. This is to make clear why Sudan is a bit reluctant to ICC. Then in 2018, after the revolution, the all of the people go on the street, and the demonstrators, their slogan is freedom, peace, and justice. And justice not only for the people in the cities, including the people who suffered during Darfur conflicts, Blue Nile conflicts, and South Kordofan conflicts, which has affected millions of the Sudanese peoples. After the revolution, then our first new government, they show to the international community that they are willing to collaborate with the ICC, and they are, but in the same time, because of this balancing between the head of the Sovereign Council and the cabinet is civilian, the Sovereign Council, some members, they are military, as I said, part of them, Burhan and Hemeti, and they are engaged in these war crimes during Bashir time. The ICC started the discussion with them, and they conducted some missions and some visit to Sudan, meet with the governmental officials, with even the IDPs in the camps, and also the civil society. It ended up by a memorandum of understanding that the Sudanese government will collaborate with the ICC, but nobody have any information about it exactly. The government, they are not come out and say what is there, and also the ICC just put public information about it and press release, and not going in details on what is happening exactly. The problem now, there is another military coup in 25th of this July, and the military to take it over, and they failed now to form a government, a civilian government. Even they released the prime minister, they put him back in his position, but the problem, nobody want to join this government because it is against what the people of Sudan want. And yesterday I heard there is a visit from the ICC official also to Sudan. They meet of one of the members of the Sovereign Council, and he just talked with them generally, because he has no say to show any type of collaboration with the ICC, because this is the role of the government, which is not there now, and all the ministers, they are dismissed by the military after the military coup. During Bashir's time, they tried to have a kind of this positive complementarity by establishing special courts in Darfur, by amending the Sudanese criminal law so to include some of these crimes in the Sudanese criminal law. But unfortunately, the court is not operating, the law is not implemented, and till now there is no any kind of having justice for the victims in Sudan. The government of Sudan also, with the ICC, that they are going to present the indicted suspect, the indicted accused persons to the ICC, but not surrounding them to the ICC. So there is some debates there. What does they mean by that? And it is a kind of they want to play around that by having more time, by I don't know what is they want to reach out. Since the revolution, there is no any kind of setting any courts to trial any of war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide. The justice system is very weak, and every time the chief justice is replaced. Now we have 3 This is number 3 or number 4 new Chief Justice. And the Constitutional Court is frozen completely. We don't have Constitutional Court. So for the victim to have any justice related to the crime in the Rome Statute, it is a kind of impossible. The only way for them is only to take this indicted person to be surrounded to the ICC and to be tried before the ICC. There is no other option to find justice in Sudan now until we have a completely legal reform to the justice system in Sudan, and also to engage the victims in the process, because they are not part of any process of having justice in Sudan. Thank you. This is generally speaking. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer it.
Thank you, Amir. Very difficult political waters there. Thank you for providing that update and overview. I'd like to hear from Asmao. We haven't heard from you yet. Can you tell us more about what the ICC has done or can be doing to support the victims of the 28 September massacre? And maybe just to tell us more about the situation of the victims today, even though it's been 12 years after the devastating attack.
Ok, bonjour. Évidemment, je suivais un peu les débats qui sont vraiment très intéressants. Merci beaucoup de m'inviter à ce panel. D'abord, je vais revenir un peu sur le cas de la CPI et avec tout ce que la CPI a fait pour la Guinée sur le procès, enfin, sur le dossier du 28 septembre, bien sûr. Quand je parle du procès, tellement que j'ai envie de ce procès, hein. Je ne parle que de ça. Alors, je dirais que la CPI a beaucoup fait pour qu'on puisse vraiment avancer sur ce dossier. Et n'eût été la présence de la CPI pour accompagner la Guinée, je peux dire que on n'allait pas être arrivé à ce stade où on est aujourd'hui, parce que quand on arrive à clôturer l'instruction, c'est grâce à l'implication de la CPI et de tous les autres membres, la FIDH, les Nations Unies, et tous ceux qui se sont vraiment donné la peine de participer et de mettre vraiment cette pression internationale pour que la Guinée puisse avancer sur les enquêtes sur le dossier du 28 septembre. Et les missions, je pense que Maître Dess déjà en a parlé, les missions qui se tenaient à chaque fois que la CPI organisait une mission pour la Guinée, c'était vraiment salutaire pour nous, surtout nous victimes, parce que on se disait que voilà, quand la CPI est là, et les choses bougent. Effectivement, à chaque fois qu'on annonçait une mission de la CPI, on a une inculpation, et puis il y a des promesses qui se tiennent malgré que ces promesses-là ne pouvaient pas du tout voir le jour, mais le gouvernement était toujours là à donner des promesses. Alors, cela, je dirais que la CPI a vraiment beaucoup fait. Et malgré, au moment où on attendait le procès, surtout, et comme Fatou voulait tellement assister à ce procès du 28 septembre comme elle le promettait, malheureusement, ça n'a pas eu lieu. Et nous espérons avec le procureur Karim, les choses vont bouger. Surtout que le bonheur qu'on a eu encore cette fois-ci quand cette mission est arrivée, la mission de la CP, bien sûr, qui est arrivée tout récemment, et on a eu vraiment de très bonnes nouvelles. Ces nouvelles, bien sûr, parce qu'il y a eu un changement de gouvernement. Et j'avoue que lorsque il y a eu le coup d'État, moi, à vrai dire, j'avais vraiment peur. Je me dis, bon, voilà, tout ce qu'on a eu comme acquis, et tout est parti. Parce que c'est encore c'est toujours la transition qui va reprendre, parce que les événements du 28 septembre sont passés sous une transition. Et maintenant, c'est une transition qui va venir encore. Donc, surtout les militaires, je me dis, bon, voilà, on va retomber encore dans tous ces problèmes et il n'y aura pas en tout cas un progrès encore par rapport à tout ce qu'on a pu faire. Heureusement, les nouvelles autorités qui sont là nous parlent de justice. Et la mission, quand elle est arrivée, elle a été vraiment très satisfaite de rencontrer ces nouvelles autorités pour les écouter et puis vraiment avoir cette promesse en disant que en 2022, le procès va se tenir. Et aussi, nous-mêmes, on les a rencontrés avec la FIDH. Et le gouvernement actuel dit que vraiment qu'ils sont vraiment favorables pour le procès du 26. Alors ça nous réconforte à plus de titres. Alors, à ce niveau, nous sommes sentis vraiment regardés. Et aujourd'hui, au niveau des victimes, je vais revenir sur ce point. Et depuis qu'on a eu cette annonce, les victimes sont vraiment très satisfaites. Et j'avoue qu'avant, ils disaient, bon, voilà, on est en train seulement de parler de cette justice, ou bien sûr, la CPI vient, ainsi de suite. Ils n'étaient pas vraiment très, très engagés finalement. Mais aujourd'hui, j'avoue qu'on a un engouement fou au niveau de l'organisation parce que les gens reviennent. Ils disent que maintenant, ils ont confiance et parce qu'ils ont compris qu'il y aura la justice. Donc, il faudra absolument qu'ils soient parmi tous ceux qui sont au sein de l'organisation et surtout ceux qui seront reconnus au niveau de ceux qui ont été surtout entendus. Et ils veulent continuer pour qu'ils puissent vraiment être entendus aussi comme partie civile pour pouvoir être écoutés le jour J. Donc, à ce niveau, je peux dire que les victimes aujourd'hui se sentent vraiment très regardées malgré le besoin de soins et de psychologie qui est toujours là. Mais aujourd'hui encore, ils sont encore plus déterminés et plus forts parce que nous estimons que ce procès aura lieu et nous estimons que la CPI sera toujours là et pour que ce procès se tienne dans de très bonnes conditions. Et moi, en tout cas, à mon avis, j'aimerais vraiment que la CPI soit vraiment partie prenante dans ce processus. Alors, c'est ce que je voulais donner comme information. Je ne sais pas s'il y aura une autre question que je suis à disposition. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Asma, for bringing us up to date with the situation of the victims and that there is some level of satisfaction knowing that, or hopefully, that there will be a trial in March 2022. Time is not on our side, so I will please ask audience members if you have questions to send them through and I can put them to the speakers. And I'm going to give the floor to Jimena again to tell us more about Venezuela. We've heard about Colombia, now let's move to Venezuela. And then I'd like to give Rod a chance as well to respond to anything that's come up and put questions to you from the floor. Thank you, Jimena, you have the floor.
Thank you, Angela. So, in as much as we were not in agreement with the decision taken on Colombia, as you know, the ICC has opened an investigation on Venezuela, which we think it's a very important step. But maybe let me rewind a bit in what has happened in the last 3 years on Venezuela in complementarity. So first, the ICC Office of the Prosecutor initiated the preliminary examination into the situation of Venezuela on February 2018 with the objective of analyzing crimes allegedly committed in Venezuela since at least April 2017. In September 2018, and that's something that had never happened before, 6 ICC member countries, through a multi-state referral, asked the prosecutor to investigate potential crimes in Venezuela. This allows the OTP to open an investigation without first seeking approval by the ICC judges. In December 2020, the Office of the Prosecutor concluded that there was a reasonable basis to believe that crimes against humanity, including arbitrary detention, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence and persecution, had been committed in Venezuela by civilian authorities, members of the armed forces, and pro-government individuals. Then the prosecutor Fatou Bensouda announced in June 2021 that her office had concluded its preliminary examination. Parallelly, and I'm not going to be speaking of Venezuela too, but the Venezuelan government had petitioned the court's judge to intervene in the examination. In July, the pretrial chamber dismissed Venezuela's request. However, and that's where complementary comes in a court filing, the office of the prosecutor concluded that the authorities are unwilling generally to investigate and or prosecute such cases.
I think that...
Sorry? Oh, I think it's so. And with respect to complementarity in this submission, the prosecutor also concluded that the potential cases that would likely arise from the investigation of these alleged crimes would be admissible pursuant to Article 17 of the statute. It then also, that's also interesting, underlines the good dialogue it has had with the Venezuelan authorities, including with the general prosecutor from Venezuela. And then, as you all know, at the beginning of November 2021, Mr. Khan, while in Venezuela, announced the opening of an investigation in the possible commission of crimes against humanity in Venezuela. It is the first investigation by the ICC in Latin America. And it also concluded a memorandum of understanding with the state of Venezuela to establish mechanisms to enhance cooperation with the ICC and to obtain, adopt for the state of Venezuela all the necessary measures to have an effective administration of justice. So this agreement at the level of the investigation is in fact centered on complementarity and on positive complementarity. Strictly speaking, my understanding is that at the level of the investigation, the OTP should be investigating the facts in order to move from a situation to a case, i.e. identifying possible perpetrators, further evidence of the crimes. Here with the memorandum, we're rewinding a bit, but we completely understand that there is a willingness to give some space to the authorities to advance with the administration justice at the national level. However, our analysis on the ground shows that the Venezuelan justice system is not carrying out genuine judicial proceedings to prosecute the perpetrators of international crimes on its territory. In fact, the current justice system has been subject to control, interference by the executive branch, and to serious, very serious violation of due process, threat to victims, threat to witnesses, long delays, and also material problems such as human resources. So with our member Provea, we understand the pragmatism, and we understand that there is an urgent need in Venezuela for the rule of law to come back. Also to have also food, electricity, water to come back, but that's another issue. And so based on the letter of understanding between the Venezuelan state and the ICC, we have called for the resumption of negotiations that have been going on between the current government of Venezuela and the opposition and other political actors, because those negotiations have as one central issue the reinstitutionalization of the justice system. So we understand that this memorandum of understanding is opening a small window for this negotiation to move forward. In terms of willingness and capacity to investigate and punish these crimes, we remain doubtful about what is going to happen in Venezuela. Well, maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jimena. To all of the speakers, in one line, because time is not on our side, can you tell me what you want the ICC to do going forward, very briefly? And then I'll turn to Rod to respond to all of this information and these views that have been expressed. So I'm going to start with Amir, with your one line, if you please.
It's a great opportunity now. The ICC, they start to communicate with the government of Sudan, and before this it wasn't available. The ICC should put pressure on the Sudanese government for more collaboration, asking for a Rizé office in Sudan, and also at the same time to ask for more ways that to let them to contact the victims, the investigation to continue. And yeah, this is what I'm asking for now from the ICC. Thank you.
Thank you, Amir, and thank you for being brief. Alpha, same question for you, very briefly. What would you like the ICC OTP to do now going forward? I'm not sure if there was a problem with translation there. Alpha, can you hear me?
Oui, je vous entends. Merci beaucoup. En réalité, le contexte est très favorable actuellement en Guinée pour que des actions fortes soient entreprises parce que le régime de M. Alpha Condé s'est écroulé. La junte est très réceptive par rapport aux questions des droits de l'homme et de la lutte contre l'impunité. Donc aujourd'hui, je crois que maintenir la pression pour d'abord l'organisation du procès du 28 septembre doit être une priorité en ce qui concerne la CPI en Guinée. Et plus globalement, il y a eu un signalement il y a quelques mois concernant les exactions qui ont été commises pendant les dernières années du régime de M. Alpha Condé. Il y a eu beaucoup de personnes qui ont été tuées par rapport aux élections référendaires et présidentielles de 2020. Il y a eu une plainte, bon, un signalement qui a été déposé au niveau du bureau du procureur. Donc, si le bureau du procureur peut s'intéresser à ces événements, je pense que ce serait aussi extrêmement important pour donner un signal fort par rapport à la lutte contre l'impunité qui est déjà engagée en Guinée. Donc, c'est une préoccupation majeure pour l'OGDS, en particulier nous les avocats. Merci.
Thank you, Alpha. Asmao, you mentioned earlier that you wanted the ICC to continue to put pressure so that we have the trial in March next year. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Ok, est-ce que j'ai bien compris là? Parce qu'on dirait que ma traduction ne répond pas.
Je pense que ce qui est demandé, c'est...
Okay,
qui est demandé... Ah oui, c'est bon. C'est votre principale demande à la Cour pénale internationale aujourd'hui concernant la Guinée.
Et ma principale demande aujourd'hui, c'est que la CPI vraiment puisse continuer cette pression et cet accompagnement sur la Guinée, surtout pour le cas du 28 septembre. Parce que comme le gouvernement a promis d'ouvrir le procès en 2022, il ne faudrait pas que cette date passe. Il faudrait qu'on arrive vraiment à réaliser cela. Et surtout aussi demander à la Guinée de penser aux victimes qui sont en train de souffrir, qui ont besoin d'un accompagnement social, un accompagnement médical et surtout psychologique, parce qu'il faut ça pour qu'on aille vraiment bien au procès, parce que sans les psychologues, sans les médecins, ça va être un peu compliqué. Donc, c'est ce que je voulais rajouter. On dirait que j'ai pris beaucoup de temps. Merci.
Thank you very much, Asmao. Jimena, your one line, what do you want the ICC OTP to do going forward?
Okay, wishing list to reopen the preliminary examination on Colombia and keep the agreement. And maybe to have an investigation in Venezuela that doesn't last too long. We understand a space may be given to positive complementarity, but at some stage, it will be important to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimena. Rod, there you have it, mixed bag, positive and negative, and praise and also some criticism, but then some requests. I wonder if you would like to respond in any way to what you've heard this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, it's very difficult to cover so much ground in such a short time, and each of these situations deserve obviously a detailed discussion. So also apologies in advance that my responses might seem superficial. It's not because we think of these things in superficial ways, it's just that the time is short. No, I think all colleagues have really hit key points, and the word pressure has been one that's used, I think, by pretty much everybody. It reminds me of a Human Rights Watch's report on pressure point and how the ICC can act to the pressure point on national justice processes. But indeed, I mean, I think this is the key aspect. For Colombia, of course, yes, and of course, the points that Jimena makes are very much understood, and also things that we discussed internally within the office, thinking through. And I think the key aspect really now is how do we sustain the domestic accountability process for us, and I think this is the question that the prosecutor put to us, particularly in the light of developments in the last year before the HEP. His question was, you know, as a matter of principle, obviously he has to look at things according to the statute and the legal threshold. Would currently, if we went to court and argued that Colombia was unwilling or unable or inactive, would we prevail? And our assessment was that given the most recent developments, it would be difficult to argue that Colombia was either inactive or genuinely unwilling, unable. So in those circumstances, there had been a lot of developments. But the key issue was how to maintain the momentum going forward. And as you know, the benchmarking consultation was also something that fed into how we were discussing these issues with Karim Khan. And it's also mentioned in the agreement in the preamble. And I think the aspect that he brought to it was that there's no reason why the OTP and the court cannot continue engaging with Colombia indefinitely in relation to making sure that national processes are sustained. But if our assessment was that the admissibility tests would not be, we could not prevail on the admissibility test, that we would not succeed in court according to the legal test, then it's incorrect to keep it under pre-examination. Then the solution must be something else. And so the more creative, if you like, approach that he's bringing to some of these questions is, for him, it was clear that the situation had to move out of pre-examination if that was the legal assessment. But there must be another way in which we can still maintain our focus to ensure that the national process is sustained. What we had thought, which is mentioned in the benchmarking consultation, was that we could articulate a series of conditions or criteria were we to get to that point where we might close the pre-examination, if that was the ultimate determination, that we could basically identify those criteria that would trigger a reopening if that was necessary. And we also discussed the same eventuality if we were to open investigation. And again, the way that Karim Khan approached it was, well, let's go beyond articulating conditions. Let's get an undertaking, an agreement that's signed by the authorities to be a more, if you like, robust commitment that will also, create clear conditions around which everybody can focus. And I think one of the messages he conveyed in Colombia, and I think it will be, I take the message going forward, I think this will be key, is that the OTP shows and maintains its very visible commitment to national accountability in Colombia moving forward. So I think the key challenge in the coming months and years will be for the MOU to become effective, for the government obviously to implement it on their side, for the national accountability process to be able to function, for civil society, for victims organizations, for victims participating, for those who are appearing before those mechanisms to be able to do so safely and securely, and so that the national accountability can be sustained. I think that's the objective we all agree. It's different, this model that has been concluded, I think we all acknowledge, we haven't done this before. but I think it has the opportunity to work if indeed focus is kept on it, and if you like, that pressure point that was mentioned several times is kept on the issue. So certainly, I think we're keen to show that engagement and visibility in the coming period. And in fact, the prosecutor said several times that he's willing to engage even more robustly with Colombia in terms of visits, missions, and engagement with national accountability than even during the pre-examination phase, if that's what it will take to make sure that the national process can be a success. So let's see. I think it's the concerns are very valid, of course, and let's see if we can make a positive outcome moving forward. On just very briefly, sorry, we're taking too much time. On Guinea, indeed, we had a very recent mission, and indeed, as several colleagues have mentioned, the OTP's role has in some ways been to make sure that that catalyst effect is there. And we're hopeful that indeed, with the current discussions that we had with stakeholders and with the authorities, it may be possible in the coming period to have that trial start. We're hoping that in the coming months that can happen. We're certainly keen to maintain again that engagement and to take again missions in the new year. And the prosecutor himself would be keen also, I think, to come in person if that can also contribute towards that process happening and the trial starting. So let's see how that materializes. But certainly we're keen for that to also succeed. For Venezuela, very briefly, I think again the issue of having an MOU, in some ways the prosecutor wanted to approach Venezuela obviously in the same kind of baseline principled approach of the legal threshold. So his view was, he came in, he saw the assessment that had been undertaken by the office that was referred to as mentioned by him in Prosecutor Bensouda's previous announcements. He did his own assessment, his own review. He was briefed by the team. He was satisfied that the admissibility threshold is the complementarity test is made out in terms of the admissibility of the cases before the court. And he was satisfied about the assessment in relation to genuineness and so forth. So for him, again, it was clear that that was one outcome, which is that he must move to the next stage of opening investigation. And he wished to go to Venezuela also to convey that in person, taking up the invitation from the authorities. But also it's very clear, and it's been very clear also in public statements, that the authorities have also committed themselves to doing national accountability, to doing national cases. And so again, it was very, for us, for the prosecutor, it was very natural that he would welcome that, because it's always an option for national accountability. It's never that once an investigation is started, that accountability is turned off at the national level, or that complementarity now switches to primacy. You've seen even in Colombia, when we had a challenge from in the Al Sanusi case, or in other situations where national accountability has functioned during investigations, the office has stood back, has even accepted and changed its position on admissibility if the national process has developed. So what the MOU says and what the statement from the prosecutor says is that these two things will happen in parallel. The prosecutor will continue with the investigation, will carry out that mandate independently and partially. But at the same time, the prosecutor is certainly keen to encourage any national efforts towards genuine accountability, and will support those initiatives, as we all must. So I think that's really the message, that complementarity is always available if the states choose to exercise that prerogative. And ultimately, anyway, if there is a question on that, the chambers get to decide. And then finally on Sudan, very quickly, indeed, it's absolutely correct, as Amir says, that it's very important that the pressure is sustained in relation to both securing that cooperation that is owed towards the court from the Security Council referral. So certainly that's a message that we continue to have, and we continue to have missions to Khartoum to continue to carry out our investigation, to have that full cooperation, but also to make accountability effective. And again, it's the same message. Maybe it's becoming tiresome, but it's the same message in Colombia or in Venezuela or in Sudan or Guinea. The prosecutor's message has always been that genuine accountability must be served, whether in The Hague or in in the country affected at the national level. So in Sudan, the question of where the pending suspects whose arrest is sought where those cases may be heard is in some ways secondary. Of course, we have pending warrants and surrender requests for them to appear before the court. But the issue is that there needs to be genuine accountability. And if it does not happen at the national level, then it must happen in The Hague. So that again is the same message I think you hear in other situations. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rod, for giving us your response. I know time was a factor, but thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. And I am always in awe of the important and difficult work that you do. So thank you for your continued commitment to international criminal justice. And with that, I will hand back to Delphine.
Thank you, Angela. I'll be very short and actually we'll switch to French, I'm sorry. Non, je tiens aussi à remercier tous les intervenants et les participants à cette discussion très riche, avec de nombreuses illustrations des 4 pays qui nous intéressaient là aujourd'hui. Je souhaite quand même mentionner que nous continuerons, en tout cas à la FIDH et en collaboration étroite avec nos organisations membres et partenaires dans les pays concernés, d'essayer de nourrir le débat et l'analyse du bureau du procureur de la CPI sur la complémentarité, donc dans les situations mentionnées aujourd'hui, mais aussi dans d'autres situations que nous suivons tout particulièrement et sur lesquelles nous allons partager nos réflexions dans les mois à venir, notamment à savoir la Côte d'Ivoire, la République centrafricaine ou encore l'Ukraine. Voilà, mais je vais m'arrêter là et en tout cas, je remercie tout le monde et aussi je remercie les interprètes qui ont permis ces échanges d'expériences et de points de vue venus de différents continents. Merci et bonne fin d'après-midi.
OK, merci beaucoup Delphine, merci à tout le monde. À très bientôt.
Merci, bye.
À bientôt.
OK, au revoir.